Welcome to Planning Phase Syndicate. This is our X-Wing podcast. This is episode 147. Tonight, we have a guest on, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about the XWA points. They're beta points. So I don't know where the alpha points are, but the beta points are here. And we have Oli from the XWA on tonight to actually talk with us a little bit about the points update. We have some questions for him and kind of, what is it going to look like going forward. So we thought we pre-recorded this because Ollie's on a different time zone than everybody else. So we are pre-recording this, but you get all the glory as it is. With that being said, let me bring in my co-host for tonight. Please welcome JJ. How are you tonight, sir?
Doing all right. It feels so weird to cast during the daytime. Like I never have to worry about the light behind me being on. It's so weird. But hey, excited to talk about some XWA beta points with the points master himself, Oli.
Awesome. Also joining us is our guest tonight, Oli Pocknell, the one and only, the ace player, the guy that the one guy everybody knows from England, right? I don't even know if you're technically in England, but I know you're over in that continent over there. So how are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing well, can confirm. I mean, yeah, so for context, I think what am I? I'm 5 hours behind at least one of you. So yeah, it's time zones are weird. But yeah, I'm in Brighton. I am in the south of England. I'm coming off a work day, so you get like slightly more formal points commander today. And yeah, tell you what, the alpha points, there was a lot of them. Our first run, I'm actually pretty pleased considering how we made a first run at it. It was okay. We definitely made some mistakes, but the playtest team was amazing. And in a month, in 4 weeks, we managed 29 revisions of that alpha points to get it to where it is when you see it right now.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to have you on. We'll kind of bounce back and forth probably from, the points discussion. We might look at some of the points. I don't know. It depends on the time frame. We want to keep it somewhat short. I do have some pointed questions for you about some of the specific points, but we'll do the hard hitting stuff as we move through it. So to begin with, it won't be. I don't know. Well, you can ask Nick. The last time JJ shared my doc with Nick, and so Nick got like the full, like this is Tanner's full like unbridled thoughts. I didn't know he was going to see it. So he was ribbing me, and I was like, well, I mean, the one thing I pride myself as I've been podcasting for over 10 years. Not all board game related, but with other stuff. And one of the big things, part of my character and what I like my shows to be about is very honest and open conversations. Like we don't always have to agree. We don't always not have to agree, but the big idea is how can we like get the information out there and let people talk through it, right? So I will say I have not played X-Wing since July, so me saying some of my locals, our group kind of started to fall apart a little bit. There is discussions about getting back together now that they have like beta points, but some people have moved on to other games, so it's a little bit harder for me locally to get into it. I know we have a season of Greg's stream coming up, so there's a reason to play. And then obviously I've been very involved locally with Swoot. So
well, you're kind of describing exactly myself really for the last however. I mean, there was a possibility before all this kicked off. I was considering properly moving over from X-Wing to Star Wars Unlimited. So this kind of came at an opportune time to keep me in X-Wing, essentially. But yeah, I reckon I've played 2 competitive events in a year. And for those people who know, I'm normally a 1 tournament per month guy. I was an average of 1 game per day for about 5 years.
Wow.
I played a lot of X-Wing. So this is weird, some form of detox for me. Like the points has kind of got me back into it a bit. And yeah, it's having not played as many games, it's super interesting to see people's opinions. And actually, I'm super excited. Like, I love discourse, I love discussion. It's great when people don't agree because that's when you really get to the bottom of things. So yeah, I'm super interested to hear both of your opinions about all of this. It's going to be great.
Yeah. So I guess as we kind of kick off, right? You know, there was a let me switch my camera over, but there was a points document that was released. We went over that on our show earlier this week. So anybody who's watching who watched 146 got to see JJ and I talk a little bit about the actual points update. We didn't get like super detailed into all the points, but we did kind of go over this document. So I don't want to spend a million hours on this specific document, right? Because we kind of already covered it. One of the big things I think that I really want to touch on to begin with, right, is bringing the extended back. And I think that's a great starting point because when we talk about, you know, what the future of X-Wing looks like and how all of this stuff kind of works together, right? One of the largest like qualms that tore apart the community was I have a million ships and I can't play 50% of them because of AMG. And while I understand the reasoning behind it, it does suck. And it did make it a lot harder. And so now with X-Wing kind of sunsetting and moving into a what we would call a fan-led group, and I want to stick to that not as a derogatory, but as like a positive because I don't want lawsuits coming to you guys, right? So this is a fan-led group that we are doing, that people are doing for free out of the graciousness of their heart, right? Like the only Patreons that I know of that exist are people that are offering extra content that will bling your game out, and then the actual Yasby, and I can't remember the name of the other one, Launch Bay.
Yeah,
those, they have them to support the actual engines that run the points. But let's going back to the extended points. There's a little bit of excitement to say, hey, I can now play any ship I want. But what does that mean kind of going forward? Does that mean you're going to be playtesting? You playtested all the extended points, and B, does that mean there's going to be a way for people to be able to play those specific ships going forward once we actually hit a what I would call an OP season next year?
Yeah. So first of all, getting the disclaimer out of the way. Yep, 100% not for profit. Obviously, we're not a business, so this is just, I think, to quote Greg, he's never worked on anything that wasn't paid for so hard in his life. So, yeah. But in terms of where we're looking, in terms of where we're going forwards, we planned, as you said, everything to be playable, because low-hanging fruit essentially is one of the easiest ways of making a success story of all of this is trying to bring back a lot of those ships. And what was super interesting is I loved what AMG did at the start, and the idea that they had of have a standard meta which you could then rotate in and out. So a lot of these ideas were fantastic about, like, the loadout system is actually quite interesting, especially having properly looked at it and played with it over the last couple of months. A lot of these ideas were great, and then they never really got implemented because you have a company that is made for one game dealing with four, right? So we're hoping in the future. I can't tell you right now what the future brings. We definitely have store kits and stuff in the works. We have some really, really cool stuff to preview very soon. I'm really excited for some of the, like, all of the promos and bits that should be coming out soon. So there's definitely going to be OP. What that looks like is a very good question. By the time we get to OP, let's say if we're having a look at a timeline, we've got Adepticon over in March. We are essentially, the game is being officially dropped at Adepticon, right? That's when the handover, if you term it that, will, when AMG officially sunsets and we can say, right, we are now officially community, just like something like Blood Bowl, we're just a community run game. At that point, we would like to think that there would be, I'm certainly for myself, at least one revision in points, maybe two, depends on where we're at that point. As we're getting those beta points honed in and we're working out exactly what we want to do, there's a lot of discussions that need to happen before we can say definitively where we go. Do we stick with 20 and loadout? That's going to be a big discussion, and that's something that everyone is going to be involved in. That's not a behind the scenes thing. That's as a community, how do we want to move forwards? There's a few other things that we've got to do as well. So work out, as you say, like, are we going to go extended? Are we going to go standard? My personal opinion, I think we should have the first season as extended. I think all of these ships have been in the cupboard for way too long. And if we can make a decent game that has some semblance of fun and balance in it, then yeah, I haven't seen anything so far that has completely broken the idea of a tournament with these points. So why not give it a go?
Sure. And I guess to kind of piggyback on that, like, and maybe you can't answer this, but maybe this is something that this is Tanner trying to plan ideas, saying, okay, hey, fine, you guys bring extended back. I've got new players, for example, at my store who don't own everything. Are they going to be able to proxy ships? Is that like is that going to be a decent? Is it like, does it really matter if a bloody TIE fighter is sitting on top of a Kimagila, base? Like, I mean, is it really that big of a deal? In my opinion, it's not.
So
but
yeah. Now this is where we're going to have my opinion. We're going to have whatever the official opinion ends up being. So right now, this is Oli speaking, as opposed to XWA speaking. My personal opinion is that I think go and 3D print whatever you like. Within, like, again, we are now community. So obviously there's a load of ships out there. If you happened to find a friend with a 3D printer and say, hey, I really want this cool ship that looks like an Alpha Starwing. Oh, cool. It's really similar. It's not quite an Alpha Starwing, but it's an Alpha Starwing. And you happen to put that on top of a peg, then great, go for it. If you happen to go to Etsy and find this really cool person who does a load of cardboard bases that look very, very similar to a load of cardboard bases that we happen to own, well, fantastic. If you go to Infinite Arenas and you want to print off a load of really nice summary cards, that means you don't have to bring like a whole deck to your board game night. Like, all of these things are out there. I would imagine that that's one of the biggest things that will happen in the future. The other thing, and this is something that I am thinking about in terms of the future and tournaments and everything else, I don't want to make it a situation where price scalping is just the normal. I'm aware of how much gunboats are going for online. I'm aware of how much stuff like Star Vipers are going to be going for online. So I think we need a good solution to that. And technically, as you say, the game is all like cardboard squares. That's what it is. It's a game. It's got a lovely Star Wars skin over the top of it that we all love. But the game at its core is just using the squares. So I'm sure that we can find some workaround for that in the future.
Well, and I think
that's personally.
I just think that's important if you want to continue growth in the game. For
100%.
example, I own like 6 Chemogilas. I will happily sell some to somebody if they really want some. But like, really the idea is like, you shouldn't have to come to Tanner's personal stash or Corey or JJ or Ali or anybody. It's just let's get it out there and help everybody be able to play.
And as I say, I very much agree with that. I think that's the future. I think that's the direction we're going to go. And I also think that we were having a chat just before we went live. And one of the ways that JJ got a load of his work colleagues and stuff interested is he had a diorama set up at his work. I'm stealing this idea. It's great. I'm going to do it at my work and see if we can get people interested. But that kind of thing, and when they have that conversation, then you can start off by borrowing, and then you go from there and go, oh yeah, I might want to buy some ships. I might want to look at where I can get these. And I think, we need to, in the future, safely provide some of these areas, not by ourselves, but pointing people in the right direction. I mean, people have been producing Star Wars adjacent things on Etsy for years without getting massive lawsuits. So I don't think we should have too much of an issue there.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've been following this Kickstarter for a long time called Mobile Frame Zero, where they create little like ships and mechs out of Legos. They're small enough to be the scale of X-Wing. You can have them custom made, so you can make your Lego versions of whatever ships you might be missing. That is an option for people as well who may not be comfortable with 3D printing. As long as you get like a reasonable appearance, I'm sure your TL will be okay with that.
So what you're saying is that you can feed 2 addictions at once.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
fair enough. All right, let's keep moving on. So I think that to me that was the biggest thing that kind of stood out, that article, right? And this is coming from, I've only played technically since COVID, but lots of people were selling stuff during COVID, and I had extra cash because what do you do when you can't go anywhere, right? It's like I have extended ships that I've put on the table once in a great while. So, like I could personally say being able to put my Shadowcaster on the table is exciting. So, But let's talk a little bit about the adjusting to the power level. So JJ kind of had a point that where he wanted to understand or wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, what it is. Like you put a blurb in here about adjusting power level, but what is that, right? Like how did that process go about? Um, and kind of what was your initial process for starting revamping the points?
So the way that I had a look at this is, if you have a look at the history of X-Wing the game, when we started off with the original version, if you go all the way back to 2012 1.0, the basic version of the game had 8 TIE fighters versus 4 X-Wings at a competitive level. That was it. You had Wedge Antilles and 3 Red Squadrons, and Wedge had no room for anything. He just literally just Wedge. Couldn't even take a torpedo. I think he could get an astromech, and that was about all you could fit. Plus not even Harrow Runner. If you're taking 8 TIE fighters, I think we realized that 8 TIE fighters plus a couple of name pilots was it. You put that on the table today, it doesn't. It just gets annihilated. Power creep is a thing in games. We all understand that. So having a look at where we got to, my biggest issue with that is, one was turn length. And we're looking at how many interactions and how many things are happening, especially with a lot of the newer cards that have come out. There are so many bits on the card that allow you to do this and this and this and this and this. There's a lot of interactions and actions that happen every single ship. So you go, okay, that if we have 5 ships that can do that on the board, that means our game's going to take a shorter amount of time. We're only getting 4 turns. And the other thing that we're doing is, when the power level, and by power level, I mean ship efficiency. If you have a look at a ship and you have a look at, okay, how many red dice it got, how many green dice it got, how many actions can it do? Because realistically, X-Wing is a game of how many actions can you take for free. That's, if you're looking to build a list, that's a really good place to start. Can I take a ship with multiple free actions for the cheapest points possible? Every ship in the modern metagame, in the modern competitive environment, can do that. So that actually forced most of the other lists out of the game. So if you think about droids, for example, and TIE fighters, for example, that was something we haven't seen in the game in a while. And I believe that's not because of the change to objectives. I actually believe that's because the efficiency curve got so high. You could no longer have a TIE fighter or a droid costed unless you make it 1 point. You cannot have it costed effectively to allow someone to fly that in a game and it be efficient enough to succeed. So the only way that you're going to get some of those amazingly thematic lists back into the game is by looking at the highest level competitive things. And we're talking about only a very small percentage of the game. Look at those highest level percentage things and go, okay, you need a little bit of a love tap back to a level where you can fly competitively a load of drones, a load of TIE fighters. And that was where I started, basically, as I went, okay, what does a good droid list look like? What should it look like? And let's think, okay, how powerful is that list? I then went, okay, I need a starting point. I know that that's my aim. That's my goal. I need to get that into the game. So with that in mind, where do you go to bring the extended ships to that level? Because they haven't been touched in years. So you need a comparison point. So we looked at the most balanced meta that we could find in a long time. We did a bit of research on this, found at the end of 2.0, when AMG took over, right before it changed to 2.5, it was basically everything was available. Most things were being flown at a reasonable level. You could take most ships. So we thought, okay, that's our marker. But when we swapped from 2.0 to 2.5, you were fitting 270 point lists on the regular basis at the high end of competitive scale. So we said, okay, let's work out in terms of a percent. If 200 points is 100%, then where are we right now? And we worked out we're about 150 to 155% more efficient, as in you're effectively flying a 310 point list in old 2.0 money. That's what you get today. If you were to take all of the arcs and all the B-wings, they would be about 310. So we said, okay, let's put some numbers to it. Let's try and get it to about 130%. So you're looking at 260-ish, 270 points in old money. And because the loadout system actually works really well for that, you take your TIE fighter pilot, who is 20 points in old money, and is now 2 points in the new world. And you say, okay, if he was 25 back in 2.0, in present money, he is 2. So that's 20. You just call it 20, you times it by 10, and then he would get 5 points of loadout. Cool. So that's how you do it. And that was what I did with every single ship in the game. I went, okay, what was its 2.0 cost? What's its present cost? Work out what it should be, add on the loadout, blah, see what we get. I threw the crap at the wall and see what stuck. And obviously, so many things just didn't work. But it gave us a level that we could then balance from. And we went, okay, if I now know that my target lists, it's like, okay, we've got some ace lists, we've got some beef lists, like went to resistance and had a look at the T70s and went, right, this should be viable. This shouldn't, this should. And then we balanced around those and went, okay, so now we have this ballpark that we're going for. Let's now see if we can get everything about the same level from there. That's how we went about it. There is a lot more intricacies after that, but that's the starting point. How we got there.
So in an effort to not like make everybody fall asleep, we don't have to go. Like, I'm interested in that. I have a statistical background, right? And like what I do for a living, we do some analyzation about that type of stuff. So like,
yeah,
I would love to sit for like 6 hours and we could actually talk through this, because there was a gentleman's name, the guy that figured out and broke the Nantex when FFG screwed up and gave us Nantex way too cheap. Whatever that guy's name is, I still have his spreadsheet, like his conversion sheet. Like, I have, like, before we went to 2.5, I tweaked that. And as points were coming out, I was like messing around with it so that way I could try to figure out how he broke, like how he broke it originally.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it comes as a shock to no one. I'm a physics teacher. I'm scientist background. I made an algorithm. Every single time new points came out, I was just like, right, what is efficient? But we also had on the points team, we have Greg, and we have Dale. So myself and Catherine were the numbers heads, and then you've got Greg and Dale who were just like, is it cool? And does it pass the eyeball check? Because I'm going off all the maths, and then Greg comes in and goes, yeah, but that's dumb, and you missed this, and that's exactly what we need. So yeah, it's great.
So I know that that you identified issues like early on after you did the initial conversion, converting the initial their old 2.0 cost into 2.5. Did you find that it was difficult to balance the ships based on their individual factions? Like, meaning, like, were you comparing them across different point values with other ships in the same quote unquote role or archetype across factions, or were you trying to balance them according to just themselves?
So what we tried to do is we tried to have a look at whole lists to start off with, because if you start trying to compare too much cross factions, then it gets really, really messy really, really quickly. I think one of the things that people have done in the first couple of days of points testing is they've just looked at their own faction specifically and gone, oh, this has got worse, without looking at the whole game and going, yeah, but everything has got a little bit worse in terms of like the really, really competitive stuff like Han Solo and Arcs. One of the things that we tried to hit was, I'm going to use the 5 pointers and the 6 pointers as a good example. Let's have a look at Kylo and Vader, because I think that's a really good example. Have a look at Kylo Ren in the Silencer and in the TIE Whisper. And then have a look at Darth Vader in the X1, and then have a look at the standard loadout Battle of Yavin Luke and Battle of Endor Wedge. We felt like all of those ships more or less should be about the same effectiveness. So that's why they're all 6 points. The question is then, you've got the standard loadouts that you can't move. Those are locked in. They are that good. So if you're going to make them 6 points, then the other ships also need to be worth 6 points. So then you start playing with loadout values and you go, okay, how much loadout does Vader need to make him as good as Battle of Endor Luke? Because he's got more agility, but he's got less offense because you haven't got a torpedo. And that's when you start going into the intricacies and tweaking a little bit up and down. Most of that's by eyeball. After you get the algorithm running through and you go, okay, with my experience of the game, if I had Luke on the other side of the table, how much stuff should I put on Vader to be fairly good in a 1v1? And then certain ships, which is where it got really messy, like Jan Ors, break that idea, because Jan Ors is a multiplier. She makes everything around her better, but she is useless on her own, which is why she has absolutely no loadout, because even with an engine upgrade, she was too good at 5, but we've seen her at 6 and nobody uses her. So yeah, it was a hard thing to balance in that regard.
So to kind of piggyback off that, because now we're getting a little bit into points, and so now I get to get a little bit more pointed because there's some issues I have with a few different things. But
yeah,
when you talk, so for example, Jan Ors, you have Moldy Crow is as a title. She can now take that for free, which still allows her to enable her ability.
Yes.
But yet you have Grievous that now has to pay 9 points for Solus 1, but then you lower his average cost down to 4, right?
Yeah.
So now you're telling me is, well, you could take Grievous for 4 points. You could either take an outmaneuver and Impervium plating, or you could take Solus 1 and Impervium plating. And if you don't take the Solus 1, you're probably crazy, like especially in that faction because of the firepower aspect of it. The outmaneuver at an I4. If people are going to put more I6s and I5s on the table, which is what we were seeing towards the end of I guess as we're seeing right now in what I would call AMG X-Wing, right? How do you go about balancing something like that? Because like for me, Moldy Crow creates Jan as an extremely efficient. And again, I'm gonna pick on Luke. You take Luke, you put normal Luke at 5 cost, right, versus the 6, but you don't give him enough loadout to take a missile. But when you put him and Jan together, it's like he's got a he has a proton torpedo every shot, and he has 2 force and a focus, and he doesn't need a lock for any of the stuff. Now he doesn't get the re-rolls as much, right, if he doesn't take the lock, but you essentially did the same thing. Why not just give him enough loadout for that and just say Jan is a poorly designed ship? Because that's like, to me, I feel Jan is a very poorly designed ship, just like Torkel Mux. And maybe I just am anti-Hawks, but I hate Torkel Mux with an insane passion.
So you've hit on a very interesting point by picking on the Hawks here. There is a reason, and I know this has annoyed a lot of people, because generally we've tried to be thematic with upgrades and such. I'll come back to Grievous in a second, but sorry, I'm going to tap by fly. With Jan and all the other Hawks, I didn't have enough time to balance them out with the idea of Crow and no Crow, which is why you see every single Hawk is assumed to be taking the multi-Crow title, and that title is free. A good part of the reason for that is I didn't want to have to deal with compounding their abilities. As you say, some of their abilities are just ridiculous. They're too good. So imagine bringing a Hawk down to, say, 3 points with no multi-Crow title, and you have the ability. So it's basically just a flying potato, but it buffs everything else. If you start bringing multiple Hawks, where's the break point? There were going to be some ridiculous combos in Scum, for example, where you could fly Torkil, you could fly Palob with no titles, and that would make the rest of the list just ridiculous. So I didn't want to have to deal with that with the amount of time we had to test. So that's why certain things I've left the title on. Jan Ors is an interesting example. Yes, her ability is really, really, really good. And this is one of those things of kind of rotating in ships that have been out for a little while. So we're aware that we can't get perfect balance. And especially in the time that we had, we can't get perfect balance. We had a lot of testing on Jan. Jan was one of our big testing points because we knew how good that ability is. The reason that we've left her at 5 and 0 instead of putting up to, say, I would guess somewhere in the region of 6 and 12, maybe 6 and 15, is because with all of this around, we wanted to provide the rebels the option to fly a good 4-ship, right? So as you say, Luke gets that proton, or Wedge gets that proton torpedo every single turn. But if you're assuming with Jan, she buddies with 1 ship. Most of the time you get that every single turn. There's a whole rest of the list there as well. If you just up Luke's loadout and kind of assume that Jan is just an outlier, then suddenly Jan focuses on another ship and Luke gets the torpedo, and you start getting the snowball rolling down the hill. So that was the Jan argument of, if you're going to be flying Jan, she needs to be as squishy as humanly possible. I almost took the title off her, but it was a question of, I think that with 0 loadout, she can be balanced. and I think she's okay at where she is. She's definitely good, and don't get me wrong, I think she's one of the best rebel pieces in the whole game right now. But I think if we can keep her at that, it keeps two people happy, because it keeps people that like to fly Jan happy, and it also allows people to not complain about the theme argument, because we have tried to follow that as much as humanly possible. When we go Grievous, original plan with Grievous was not to give him Impervium and the title. So you could either have Outmaneuver and Impervium, or you could have the Soulless One title. The Soulless One title was going to be 11 and just take up all of his loadout. Again, that one got changed for theme. It kind of went backwards and forwards. It was a question of, okay, let's see if there are things available for him. With the title changes like Virago and Soulless One, mainly stuff that adds shields or a hull upgrade, we have made worth points for the titles. Because if they're baked in, that extra shield or hull, I mean, we've said that shield or hull are worth 9 or 10, so that was why we kind of went down those roads.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Now, for
you muted.
You're muted, JJ.
I pulled a Dion. Sorry. With the rebalance, then a lot of these, with a lot of the themes, right? You talk about Multi-Crow being thematic for the Hawk and stuff. You know, do you feel that faction identity, is it still possible with all the? Is it still possible with all these upgrades and up balances, or is this something of the past that it's going to be harder to accomplish because the powerful upgrades and titles that are available make it difficult for it to balance in order for that faction to retain its faction identity?
That's, yeah. I mean, one of the things going in that we wanted to hit was faction identity. That was one of the big things that we felt was missing quite often with the game. If you have a look at what we've done with Republic, for example, we wanted to give Republic back all the Jedi. We wanted to say, right, these ships are good without taking away all the clones, because also having a clone like group is one of the things that Republic is awesome for. So we hope that we've done that with something like Republic. With the Empire, we know that the TIE Swarm is a massive thematic list, but also like something like bombers. Like bombers are still good. Like there are, obviously we've had to nip some of them. And by the way, I know Jonas is annoying a lot of people. The build your own Jonas, not the standard loadout Jonas. The power multiplier of him having his rerolls is so incredible. That's why he has no ability to take missiles. So you can fly him with his buddies, and they can all take missiles, but he can't take a missile himself to try and reduce the power output. That was why that decision was made. But yeah, so with these themes, the way that I've certainly, as a long-time Empire and Rebel player, playing since early in the game, I've been playing long enough that I've seen the faction identity shift and come around multiple times. Empire for a very long time was purely the Swarm faction, nothing to do with aces. If you were flying an ace, it was just to back up your Swarm. Like, so Ace Mini Swarm was a thing for quite a while. And then obviously I'm known for the Imperial Aces I won Worlds with. That came in 2017, 18, 19, where it was a viable thing. You could fly Palp Aces. That actually only got changed because of an upgrade. Emperor Palpatine basically single-handedly, and auto thrusters, made aces a viable choice in Imperials. So what I'm kind of looking at with the faction identity is I'm trying to give back some of those historical faction identities that people have really enjoyed. But also I'm trying to give people the ability to fly multiple different styles. Do you want to fly aces? Do you want to fly a swarm? Do you want to fly beef? That's generally the three styles. Technically control could be considered in there with bombs as well. But those are the styles. And I wanted to try and get every single faction with the option to fly a decent ace list. Maybe it's a jousty ace list, maybe it's a dodgy ace list, but a decent ace list. Some form of swarm and some form of mid-range beef, trying to get those into the game for each faction. And then hopefully that would help back up those faction identities.
Well, and I think that's good, and I think that allows for, you know, some variance, right? You know, like that was the one of the things, like, you know, I'm a CIS main, pretty much have been. When they introduced fire sprays to CIS, it was like, oh my gosh, here we go. Like it sucks because our fire sprays are hard to balance, in my opinion, right? Though I see Boba comes down to 8 points, so I don't know, like it's hard not to just swerve back to Scum, but the idea like that we were given something in CIS that changed the
Yes.
style and format really felt good. It felt like a breath of fresh air from back when they did that. Then we got rogues, right? And the rogues just do not work like X-Wings. I don't care what anyone says. I
Yeah,
don't
they're not
like
the same.
people can say all you want, like A, CIS plays different, B, they just do not filter in together. So when we talk a little bit about the points balancing, right? You said, "Hey, you created a baseline. You kind of went from there. You did some math, then all of a sudden you turned around and said, okay, well, hey, we're going to do this math, and now we're going to talk, to Greg and Dale and say, how can you do this?" I assume that's why we have a 4-point Grievous to some extent is because of Greg, because that's his favorite ship in the whole game, right? But what I've noticed, and this is let's talk a little bit, I think, about some of the different points. And we don't have to actually go through all of the different ones. I could bring the doc up here if you want, and we could kind of talk a little bit about them. Because this is kind of where some of my I don't know if I want to call it concern, but I would say what we ran into with AMG, like you had said, is a very large power creep, right?
Yeah.
And basically everything, like what they wanted to do was create it so that the game time, my opinion is they wanted to create it to reduce game time, right? So, oh my gosh, everybody takes proton torpedoes, everybody's throwing 4 dice. At some point, these games should be 30 minutes, right? And that didn't happen. Like I don't know if anybody watching this went to Worlds this year. I went to Worlds, we played, and the majority of my games went closer to time, right? And it didn't matter. I had Blackout, I had Kylo. It didn't matter. They still had the time, right? And so I guess some of the things that I've noticed is that certain, and I'm going to pick on Soontir Fel, right? Or I'm going to pick on a Vader, or I'm going to pick on Luke. And it feels like even though that there was some rebalancing done for Empire and Rebel, it still feels that they ended up with the larger shift, right? They still feel like their factions have the higher or the more ability to create more of a win more scenario, right? And again, I told you I'm a CIS main. I look at CIS and I have a little bit of heartbreak losing a lot of my 2-point droids, unless I want to play the AMG versions that I just do not care for, right? I do. Like CIS faction identity is landing on obstacles. That's just it is what it is. Their versions of it make it is like collision detector. You go through the obstacles, which is fine. And I won't lie and say like I use 404 very effectively when he first came out. For the first Worlds I ever played in, that was my list. And it was an effective tool at that point, but it's still not as good as landing on a stupid rock and just turreting. It's just like many little turrets. And so the long story short is and let's talk a little bit about the rebalance aspect and why certain factions, for example, CIS, got hit with stuff, even though they have been on the bottom tier of the AMG. Yeah. So Scum and CIS have both been on that bottom end tier. And it feels like when there was some rebalancing, it feels like CIS kind of like, it's like, hey, you can have Grievous, but not anything else. And that, to me, that's how some of that feels. And I know that's, I haven't put stuff on the table since July. So, this is, and I haven't, and in fairness, I have actually not put CIS on the table since probably January competitively. I switched to FO for Worlds. So let's talk a little bit about, like the individual factions and kind of like the point balancing and how you came to those type of decisions within each of the different factions.
Sounds perfect. I mean, so the first thing that I want to just mention, so it doesn't go out of my head, the main thing that I want to hit in terms of the whole point there is the amount of ships available to Rebels and Empire. So that's the main thing that I want to come back to in a second. But I think dealing with CIS first is a really good idea. But the main theme on why do those factions feel like they're ahead of the power creep is actually not, I think, because they are ahead of the power creep, but because of the amount of, and you said earlier how it felt like a breath of fresh air with when you got the fire sprays. The amount of extended options that are being given back to the 3 main original factions, so Scum, Empire, Rebels, they just have more ships available. So naturally, if there is one broken ship on every chassis, they are going to have access to more broken ships. So that's something we did think about quite heavily when we brought that back. Going back to CIS, I think this is super interesting because CIS in testing were one of, if not the top faction. So when we were playing all of our games, it felt like, yes, everyone naturally gravitated to, oh, this is broken, when they did the head sim of both Empire and Rebels, because everyone looked at those and went, oh, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. We remember all the things that came up in the past. We're doing our best to make sure that testing doesn't bring out a set of broken points. But when the ships got put on the table, resistance was really, really good. And the specifically droids with energy shells, and there is a reason that the droids are not allowed to take the extra calculate. The reason when they have energy shells, they're not allowed to take that calculate is because they're really, really scary, like genuinely scary. Those little 2-point droids with access to energy shells. I think that is probably going to be one of the best lists in the whole game, in my opinion, based on what I've seen so far. Not purely because of the droids themselves, but because you can fit 6 or 7, and then you can fit an ace, or you can fit a big ship, and genuinely terrifying in that regard. So I agree with you. On the subject of faction identity, we've given droids back, hopefully, and this was our aim. We wanted to give the drones back, that 2-point droid that you could go and turret on a rock. Now, yes, I've moved a lot of them up to 3. The reason for that is because if you leave them all at 2 points, what I saw, especially with the testing and when I was just building lists, if you leave them all at 2 points, then what will happen is you'll pick the drone that has either the most loadout or the one that has the highest initiative. There isn't any in between. The others just get completely ignored because there is clearly a best droid at that level. What we said is like, okay, if that's going to be the case, then we're just going to leave one of them or a couple of them, because the Precise Hunter is the exception to this rule, because it doesn't have the missile slot. It has a bit more loadout, but it doesn't have a missile slot. So we thought, okay, we'll leave that one at 2. It's pipped. There's only 3 of them. But for the rest of them, we can go from there. Similar thing with like the Horchow, because again, it's initiative 1. So we felt like it was okay with the trade fed drone to leave it at 2 points with access to those missiles. So yeah, so that was the thinking behind the CAS in that regard. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, so sorry. Well, and I guess maybe in testing it in theory it seems good, but when you roll the 3 dice and you're not able to modify them very easily, it's a little bit harder. And typically, by the time those droids that have 2 calculates that are sitting there are shot at, you're spending most of the time. You're spending your calculator. You're taking a damage or 2. Now maybe with some of the other loadout values coming down, some of the missiles going up, and not seeing as much ammunition, maybe they become a little bit less scary in terms of that. I mean, when I first started, the reason I started playing CS is because people were putting swarm like TIE fighter swarms on the table, and at the time CIS felt new to me, right? And I wanted to learn how to play a swarm. So I said, I'm going to play CIS just to learn how to play a swarm, because if I don't know how to play it, how do you defeat it, right? And that was the easiest way, during COVID, right? Like to buy the crap yourself and like set it up against yourself and play yourself,
Yeah.
Um,
So this is the things that you're saying is exactly what we came across. Initially, when we first gave this to the playtesters, they had exactly the same reaction, like 100%. And we found that we were ready for the community reaction to these points, because the playtesters did exactly the same thing when they were really concerned, because they looked at all their factions, especially the ones they fly on a regular basis, and they went, oh, but this is terrible. And we have a look at the droids recently, and the things that I'm seeing coming out are, oh, but we left the Discord missiles at the same price, and oh, but like you haven't given access to the munitions, and the droids are just going to get popped. What we found is that because the power level of we got an echo going on. Is that just? Oh no, there
it's JJ.
But because the power level of the rest of the game has changed, and you can't fit those massive alpha strikes anymore, That was what the whole idea of the droids coming back was balanced around. And most of the things I'm seeing at the moment, which is I'm kind of excited for actually, and I've had a couple of people come back after a couple of days when they've got some games in, and I'm hoping this is going to be the case for most people who are finding they're looking at it and going, I'm really, really concerned, because that's most people's first reaction when they see these points is most of these are okay, but I'm really worried about this and this and this. When they've actually managed to get them on the table, they've come back and gone, that wasn't anywhere near as bad as I expected it to be, or anywhere near as good as I expected it to be, because of the fact that we balance the whole thing around a couple of these lists. We think we've got it more or less okay with that. So I'm hoping that especially when Draft League comes in, because that's going to be amazing, like seeing really like, let's get this stuff tested. I'm hoping that we're going to see that actually there are so many different options that seem terrifying. Like, I'm not going to lie, 5-star Vipers, I look at that and I like crap myself. Like, that's not okay to see across the table. But every single time one of our testers put it on the table, it was like, oh no, this has been a really close game, and it's one of the most fun games of X-Wing I've played in a very long time. So I've sat back, I've trusted them, and I've gone, okay, we wanted to give it a go, and it seems it's okay. So we'll see how it goes.
So to kind of piggy off back on that, right, between like the Star Vipers coming back and the conversation he had about the droids being at 2 points and stuff, I know that there was a massive rebalance for a lot of the generics that came by. One of my personal concerns was, the inclusion of affordable generics, that when they're spammed too much can be a problem, versus when they're too expensive, they're basically useless when you're comparing them to named pilots of the same type. How did you approach that? How did you feel? How could you make the decision between, making them available so that way they're at least options, versus pointing them to where they're not really viable?
So this is where we kind of got into a bit more of the detail, and I'm kind of drawing on a lot of what was broken in the past. So I thought back to all of the different things that were absolutely horrible. So we're thinking Nantex, we're thinking Duke Phantoms, we're thinking, like, if you go all the way back, you've got like Ghost, Fen, and Dengaroo, and like what was making those things broken. A lot of it is the upgrades that you can fit on the generic ships. So what we did is we had a look at all of the previously broken upgrades. So Foresight, Snapshot, Duke, things that get better when you compound them and have more and more and more. Same thing with the energy shells. We were just like, okay, we got to be careful with this, because if we make this too good, then this could be horrendous. Proximity mines was another one. So all of these generics are pointed with those in mind. If you look at the generic, and it seems that for some reason that generic has slightly less loadout than it should, it's probably because there is an obnoxious combination, and we've pointed it 1 point below that obnoxious combination. For example, if you have a look at the tugboats, they have exactly 7 loadout. That is the reason for them allowing prox mines. It is also the reason that they used to have 9 loadout, and everyone ran them with both proximity mines and dead man switch, and that was terrifying. So, like, this is a reason why some things have certain loadout. The Phantoms, for example, don't have a talent slot for that reason, so that they can't all take Duke. We removed talent slots from things. We removed the gunner slots from the Y-Wings because someone spotted on the Republic Y-Wings, the Red Squadrons, that you could fit veteran turret gunner and a ion turret and bombs, and oh god, that was terrifying. So yeah, like, we think we've caught them all. We've tried to, as I said, there was 29 points revisions, so a lot of those points revisions were us going, please test this generic, this generic, this generic. Like, we're going to have this week focused on all of these generics, and I want you to spam them as much as possible and make sure that nothing you can find is horrendously broken. So yeah, that's what we were doing all the way through testing, is trying to find those combinations. And I was pleasantly surprised by things like, as I said, the Kimagilas, the Star Vipers. If it doesn't have double mods a lot, or it doesn't have auto damage, a lot of the time it's not as bad as you think.
Awesome. I think we're coming up close to an hour, so I want to make sure we be respectful of your time. And I don't know how much, without going into exact points, I don't want to spend too much going through that, right? So I think, some of the big things that you've hit, right, is the idea is that there's fair and balancing that you guys work towards. You wanted to try to make things, supposedly CIS is still going to be good on the table. So I don't know. You got a 4-point Soontir fell. So I'm just saying, like, a targeting computer 4-point Soontir fell is a pretty scary topic thing.
My one response to Soontir, because yes, like that looks busted, right? When you have 8 firing arcs on a table, all of which get a free crit, he's not happy. He's really not happy.
But obviously these are beta points, right? And I think, like the idea here, right? Your scope can't end right here. And so, like, I'm going to kind of combine 2 questions and say, hey, well, can you tell us as we close the show, can you tell us a little bit about, what is the long-term scope? What is your, like, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year plan, as well as how are you going to be taking the feedback, right? So, and I'm gonna pick on myself for an example where I say, hey, I feel CIS is underpowered. I want to be able to take independent calculates and energy shells to counteract somebody giving Jan Orr's Moldy Crow and Torkoal Muck's Moldy Crow, by the way, with loadout points. I hate Torkoal Muck so much. I hate that shit. Just do me a favor and ban that shit. But there you go. How are you going to balance? That's part of the second question. How are you going to be able to actually go back and balance the stuff based on community feedback and being able to kind of like filter out some of the noise, is what I would call it, because people like me who are very boisterous are going to create noise if CIS does not like land on the table. If we go into a league, and I gave JJ a challenge. I said, JJ, if you think CIS isn't broken, and I'll eat my words, or I'll donate money somewhere. Maybe we'll do that. JJ has to go play in Greg's league. He has to play the top drafted player of every team, and he has to play CIS, and he has to win the game. So he has to have more than a 50-50. He has to have a 75% win rate. And if he can do that, then I'll eat my words on the CIS. If he can't do that, then what I'm saying right here is that, maybe it needs to be looked at. But how are you going to differentiate all of that out, right? Like, how are you going to differentiate the Tanners, coming in and shitting all over the points, saying, hey, well, how do I get something? Well, how do I get a 4-point? How do I get a Sun Fact that gets all the loadout, but it gets 4 points too, right? How do I get something that can be the same way?
So first of all, as much as I'm coming in, I'm answering your questions and being like, oh yeah, but this isn't a problem, guys, I promise. There probably is some things there that are a problem. We haven't got everything. There's a reason they're beta points. We push these out in a short period of time. So yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some mess ups. And we are going to go and change things. I don't want to be keeping the same schedule that we were doing in testing. I mean, in testing, there are some days where I did 2 updates in a day. Like, because we spotted one thing, we spotted another, we're moving fast, we'll get this going. That's not my intention. I'm going to borrow from another company. Some of you may play League of Legends, you poor people. I love League. I've never really played it for very long, but I love watching it competitively. And the one thing that I think is incredible is the way that Riot does updates, because they put out a little blurb. They do regular updates, say once per month, once per 3 weeks. In my opinion, for our game, they're too regular. I would love to be able to do an update every 3 weeks and change the meta, but I'm fairly sure people would murder me, and I wouldn't be able to keep up with it as well. So I do think that more regular updates are definitely a thing for these beta points. I'm hoping to do at least 2 updates before March, before Adepticon. So probably one, my guess would be around Christmas.
So what you're telling me is you don't have the AMG stance that, we just put points out. Once they're there, they're they're the best points you've ever had.
If I make the best points that you've ever had, and I leave them for 6 months, doesn't matter if they're the best you've ever had. People will be bored.
Yeah. So
you've got to fiddle with stuff just to keep it fresh. So we are going to be doing that. Now, the nice thing is that I'm not going to make the best points you've ever had. I hope I do. But even if they're the best points you've ever had, there is going to be stuff that is better than other things. So there will be things that we can tweak. We can go, okay, right, Soontir, you've had your time. You're going back up to 5 points. And we're going to give you loadout to do that. We're going to say, all right, what happens if you make Sunfac only in Snare and make him 4? Is that a thing? Like, I don't know. Maybe some of these things are in the future, but that's our intention. And at some point, going back to the feedback, playtest forms are going to be out in about a week to 2 weeks time. So we are going to be giving to the community playtest form. We have 2 amazing playtest leads. We have Daniel Isophane, who most of you know. We also have Don Flanagan from the UK, who's supporting him in that. They are data people. They are very, very good at dealing with large quantities of data. We're also hoping to, because I have a Discord group for testers. What I would love to see is I would love to see groups that are interested in continuing to test in that group. We're not, like, playtesting is still open. It's open to anyone. If they want to make a group and join that, fantastic, not a problem. But what I would say is that is for people who are committed to actually working with us and doing regular testing. You can screenshot it, you can share things from there, not a problem. It's not going to be a closed NDA, whatever. But it's just a space that's a bit quieter, as you say, lots of noise. So there are going to be probably 2 versions of the form. There is going to be a form from everybody, and then there is going to be a form that we can pay a little bit more attention to. It's not that we're going to ignore the other one, but we're just aware that everybody is doing that one. And we're going to get the tanners going, I want my shit fixed right now. So like, we're going to get that, but it means that we've got those 2 spaces so that we can quickly test things and say to the testers, right, if we were to do this, could you put this on the table with this points value and see if this works? And a couple of people can go give us a little bit of feedback quickly. Or we could tell, if we need a bigger test, we can say to the community, hey guys, this is something we're considering in a couple of weeks. Could you give it a few games and see what you think if we want a bigger testing base? And it allows us to do that. So that's what we're looking at. We're going to keep good tabs on tournaments. We're going to keep good tabs on your feedback, because actually someone's sitting at home and going, hey, I've been playing CRS for years and I know this faction really well. I can clearly see that this is a problem. The first thing I'm going to turn around and say to you is, could you show me your working? But actually, that's really valuable information, because if yourself and a load of other people are saying that, then clearly there's something to it. So we're not just going to ignore you. And it is something that I think the XWA is doing quite well, is we're players. We're the people that have been playing this game for years, same as yourselves. So I think keeping us as backwards and forwards with the community is so important. So yeah, we're not going to be ignoring people. The biggest thing that I want to avoid completely is to ever say to anyone, if you don't like it, then off you go, because both companies, before anyone calls me out for shitting on AMG, both companies have said that at different points in different ways. So FFG have said it at certain points, and obviously AMG did famously, but I think we are not a company. We cannot afford to lose players. Anybody that wants to go play X-Wing should go play X-Wing. Even if that's you want to go and play Legacy, then you go play Legacy and have a great time. And then maybe I'll see you in a year when you decide that you fancy trying XWA with scenarios again. Please, like, do that and carry on playing the game with your friends, because that's the whole point. We enjoy tiny plastic spaceships. So,
and I think one of the things, Ollie, too, right, and we're not going to get into this tonight. I don't want to actually get into it. I think there is some discussions, how can we merge points to some extent? There's got to be a way to merge the points, even if we have different play formats. But, when we talked with Nick, that was a possibility on the table. I turned the forum in, said, hey, this is how you bring that communities back together and actually regrow the game, is by recreating the point scene system.
Yeah.
But you can still let people play scenarios. Like you said earlier, a droid's worth 20 or 2 points. What the hell is it? There's no real. We know exactly what AMG did. The problem was when they created a very compact linear scale, it makes things a lot harder when you're not thinking about scenarios and all these other things. So,
if I can leave with one thing, that this is something that is in my mind on this. We've ended up with a 200-point group of people, and we've ended up with a 20-point group of people that are so very attached to those things. I think what AMG did when they made their version of the game was very clever. They made a completely new version of the points values that if you wanted to play their game, you had to change completely to 20 points. If they'd have left it at 200 and just repointed the game, nobody would have moved. They would have gone, oh, I like this old version. I'm going to carry on playing with those because it's basically the same. But because they made a new thing, I think in the future, if we're going to do that, and I agree with you, I think that is the direction we should go. I think we're going to end up with a new points value. Is that 100? Is that 1,000? Really go granularity? I don't know. But yeah,
I hope not.
Give it the Call of Duty treatment. Just add a 0 because why not? But yeah, like that's another can of worms to open. But I think everything is on the table in terms of what we're considering for the future. But again, that involves the community, and that involves us talking to everyone and working out a way forwards.
Fair enough. Folks, this is Oli from the XWA, points guru, head designer of the points. I don't know, whatever your title is. I don't even know what your title is anymore.
Person that talks way too much, and thanks for putting up with me.
Yeah, no problem. We're glad to have you on. If hopefully, like, we promised we'd be back as a podcast to not just do SWU and to do X-Wing 2. And I apologize, people are probably going to all of a sudden be like, well, why the heck do they have 2 podcasts out within like a week's time for X-Wing? Like this, I'll be honest, I've never recorded this much. We had to record our spoiler episode we got picked by FFG to do a spoilers reveal this week. So we had to do like an unlimited one, then we had to do our regular podcast, and then we did an X-Wing podcast, and now here a day later we're doing, a third or second X-Wing podcast. And anyway, long story short is I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on. And for those of you watching or listening, tell your friends that planning phases, we're still here doing X-Wing stuff, not as frequently. There's a possibility next year when you guys start releasing actual stuff, once we get through the meta, or when we start building up to that meta, there may be a frequency change in podcasts for X-Wing as more news comes out. But we didn't want to jump the gun, and that was the big thing is like I'll interview Nick, we could talk about it, but until you guys put something to the table, you got to come to the table for us, right? And then now that you're here, and you're saying, hey, help us out, that's kind of when we say, okay, hey, let's schedule something in a couple of months and talk a little bit about, before you release your second set of beta points, or,
exactly.
These are the things that are changing. Let's have you back on and have that conversation again.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Thank you, Oli, again for coming out. This is something that is very community driven, and honestly, the game lives on with the efforts that your team is going on. And, to be honest, like a lot of people were, when they announced the end of X-Wing, there are a lot of people that were just disillusioned with, with everything that transpired. And honestly, you guys have done a lot of work to help keep the hope alive, for the game. And thank you so much for all that work that you guys do.
Hey, there's a lot of people behind it, and I, for one, am super, super stoked. We've tried to give the design team as much lead time as possible, and I want to see what Mr. Heaver and all of his team are going to do to keep the game interesting and new. So it's going to be really cool.
Awesome. Well, all right. Well, thank you, Oli. If you are catching this in post, thank you for joining us. We will be back with more X-Wing stuff. We'll probably have Greg on, or you know what? We got Paul Heaver. He's the next one that JG's going to nail down. So we'll have Paul Heaver on. So we will have another X-Wing podcast within the next couple of weeks. And then we'll probably do something about the online league with Greg too as well in the next coming week. So thank you all. Have a good night, and we'll see you on the flippity flop.
Have a good night, everybody.
See you later.